It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster on what could be a make or break day for Boris Johnson as he prepares to respond to allegations he attended a lockdown party. Joining me today, the Conservative MP Craig McKinley, the Labour MP Barry Gardiner, former Government Special Advisor Salma Shah and the Chief Executive of Demos think tank Polly Mackenzie. Today.
It's very simple for me. You just have to say, was you at this party or not on the 20th of May?
MPs and the public wait to hear Boris Johnson's version of events. What happened on the 20th of May 2020?
I think if the Prime Minister knowingly attended a party, I can't see how he can survive.
Is that a resigning moment? Then I don't believe it is, because I judge people in the round.
At noon, the Prime Minister faces questions from the opposition and his own backbenchers. We'll be there.
I turn my heating off. We sit here in our coats. All my kids have got the big fleecy blankets.
More Conservative MPs call for environment levies on energy bills to be scrapped. We'll ask Craig McKinley how we go green without them. And smart motorways, how can they be made safer? As you heard there in the headlines, this is a big day in Westminster as the Prime Minister Boris Johnson prepares to face not just the leader of the opposition Keir Starmer, but his own MPs, many of whom are furious about the emergence of a drinks event in the garden at number 10 Downing Street. Eyewitnesses say that he and his wife attended the gathering of around 30 people at the height of lockdown in May 2020. The Prime Minister has so far refused to say whether he attended or not. The papers, as you would expect, are full of allegations and soup about this, but let's just show you two of them. Different papers, but saying much the same thing. The Daily Mail, is the party over for the PM? And this in the Mirror, the party's over, Boris. So my question to start the programme with you, Craig, is the party over for Boris Johnson?
No, I don't think it is, but there is no doubt this is a very, very tough day for the Prime Minister's premiership. I don't think there's any prizes for guessing what the main focus will be at PMQs. I don't think it needs a rocket scientist to work that one out. This is a tough day, but you know, on the background to this, he has appointed Susan Gray, who is a real operator. She has been in post in senior roles in Whitehall across both the Blair period and this one. She is effective, ruthless, and I think she will find the truth. So I know it's all very easy today to speculate what happened. I mean, all we've got to go on at the moment is that email that we're all very familiar with, but I would like to see what she has to say. And I think that's only fair. I was a magistrate for 10 years. Right. We have due process. Let us just see that through, and then we can say whatever we please. Right,
so you're happy to wait. Salma, is the party over for Boris Johnson?
I think this is going to be a really difficult day for him, and depending on what he actually says at Prime Minister's questions and indeed what comes out as a consequence of Sue Gray's report is really going to decide his fate. I think this is probably the most dangerous predicament he's been in as Prime Minister so far. And I think if there isn't a sort of stem on this chaos that seems to be emanating out of number 10, I think the next couple of months, especially in advance of the local elections, are going to be incredibly tricky.
Polly?
I think let's spare a thought for Sue Gray, because
this is the person who has been tasked with carrying out an investigation into all the allegations around
former
parties.
head of propriety and ethics for the whole government for years and years and years under Jeremy Hayward, now second and permanent secretary at the Department for Levelling Up, DLUC, whatever it is stands for. Because it's quite extraordinary to be in a position of arbitrating the Prime Minister's adherence to the Prime Minister's ministerial code. If she decides that he broke that ministerial code and has to report back to him, she's basically kind of torching her career, unless he then resigns, because that's supposed to be the sanction for the ministerial code. If, however, she finds that he hasn't breached the ministerial code when there is so much evidence around that all of these parties were held, then, it's then very difficult for her as well. So this assumption that we can just wait for Sue Gray and that will, I think they are hoping that Sue Gray will be slow. Perhaps even she will find there's the possibility of criminal conduct, which means it has to go to the Met, who will be even slower, and that perhaps that's a way for just the heat to go out of this. The reality is very simple, right? Boris Johnson knows whether he went to that party on May the 20th, and his choice is whether to tell the truth, relatively uncharacteristically, to Parliament, or whether to try and obfuscate and just cling on and hope that he can survive, not because of his behaviour, but because maybe people will move on.
Is the party over for Boris Johnson?
This is not about a difficult day for the Prime Minister. This is about the integrity of the government and the integrity of the Prime Minister. And that's why it's important. It's not simply, is there a process here that might get him off the hook? I think pretty much everybody in the country believes that the party should not have happened, and they also believe that the Prime Minister and Carrie went to that party. And they think that's wrong. The only way I can see Boris Johnson surviving in the court of public opinion is if he comes to the House today and apologises and means it, says sorry and says, look, I did it, it was stupid, it was foolish, I recognise it. Please allow us now to get on with tackling the really important issues that our country faces in terms of the cost of living, in terms of all the other things that are going on with COVID, because that's what we need to do. We need to focus on our health service. We need to focus on the cost of living. We need to tackle these big issues. And I'm sorry that what I've done is marred this government in the sort of obfuscation and sleaze that means we can't focus on the real issues.
Right, you're nodding in agreement. Is that what he needs to do?
Well, I think Barry's been quite charitable, actually. I mean, I would take something what Polly said. Casting some doubt about the independence of Susan Gray. In my mind, she is unimpeachable.
Well, I think it's the difficult position.
It is, but I don't think she's in danger of losing her job if she comes to the conclusion that Boris Johnson doesn't like.
How do you carry on serving under a Prime Minister if you find that the Prime Minister has breached his own ministerial code and that the sanction for that should be to resign, and he doesn't resign? How do you continue to serve as a permanent secretary?
Well, I think there are many permanent secretaries that are not always in agreement with the current government of the day, but they act.
But that's quite the Prime Minister, isn't it?
But to Barry's point, yeah, I mean, I think process is important. I don't know what happened at that party. I don't know who went. I don't know.
It's not what happened at the party.
No, well,
it's that there was a party.
You can't have a court of justice that is just what people think. I want a court of justice based on facts that we know, and that will take a few days, and I'm willing to wait for that.
The moment to call Sue Gray, of course, is when you're deciding whether to have the party. Yeah. That's when you need advice about what is the correct behaviour. It is clear that there was a culture of, quite understandably, people who were working closely together, very hard, feeling that they somehow should be treated differently from others because they were working hard. And I have sort of some understanding and compassion for that. And absolutely, they deserve our credit for the commitment that they showed navigating through that pandemic. But they weren't the only ones at the front line of public service, and they were not working anywhere near as hard as the nurses and doctors on the front line.
But the whole concept of what was, I think Salma has referred to this, what was happening at the heart of Number 10, that it could ever be deemed acceptable on an HR point of view to be having this type of invite to a party. It wouldn't have happened in a big corporate who has a reputation to maintain.
It didn't happen in the NHS, and it didn't happen in schools.
So that's my
on that issue, Salma, of culture, because you know about the culture that existed in the past in Number 10. I don't know who you still know who works there. What Polly is saying is important, isn't it? What was going on? Can you give us any sense of that culture at Number 10 that obviously in one way or another thought some sort of gathering or drinks event was OK?
I think the issue here is when you think about Number 10 cultures is that you are kind of separated from, well, people feel that they are separated from other rules and responsibilities because, as Polly mentioned, they work so hard, they're in close proximity, and because certain rules do not apply to them. So in this instance, most people who were working in that environment were regarded as key workers. And so if you're there in the office and you're interacting with people that you do with every day, you probably don't think that there's anything wrong with perhaps going out into an open space and going to have a drink. I think culturally, though, to exempt yourself in that way, when you have literally made rules banning people from doing the same thing, and also, congratulating police on pursuing people who are breaking the rules, there's a complete disjoint between that and sort of appropriate behaviour. You cannot sort of isolate yourself from certain rules. So I think, yes, it's a stressful environment. It's always a stressful environment, additionally, with a pandemic, I'm sure. But the culture there does seem to suggest, because this is not just one party, this is the fifth party that is being investigated, that suggests that actually they're allowed to behave differently.
Summer, I don't know whether you did this intentionally, but what you've just done is you've described exactly what the complaint of the country is. And that is that the people, not just the Prime Minister, but the people around him, the people who are making the rules, believe that those rules don't apply to them. And that's exactly why the country is so angry about this. And that's exactly why an apology is due, and actually a resignation is due.
So you do think he should resign?
I do think he should, yes.
Salma?
I mean, let's see what the fulsome apology looks like. People are definitely angry about this. I'm angry about this. I'm one of the people that had to, like everybody else on the panel, I imagine, were adhering to the rules.
But had you still been part of that inner circle, Salma, had you still been part as a special advisor, would you have gone to the party? What the culture that you just described says, yes, you would.
I think you can definitely see a scenario where people thought that what they were doing was harmless and they weren't thinking through what the actions and what, if other people knew about that, what their reaction would be.
One of my colleagues...
I'm not saying, no, but hold on, Barry. I'm not saying that this is something that's done deliberately. We're talking about a culture. Culture is something that occurs and it happens without people necessarily questioning or thinking about what is taking place. So I do have, like Polly said, a bit of compassion for the fact that these people were working incredibly hard. Where there is a difference is understanding that actually it doesn't exempt you from the rules because you're making them. It's about doubling down and making sure that you are following them and setting that example.
All right, Barry.
But for me...
One of my colleagues yesterday explained that he had stayed in his car in the hospital car park simply to be close to his mother who was dying inside the hospital because he obeyed the rules. He listened to what that group of people partying had actually said publicly people should do. He observed the rules and he lives with the pain of it.
Right. Yeah, well, I'm just going to pick up. Hang on. I'm just going to pick up on this point about the rules, them and us, what people were doing at the height of lockdown, because this is not just a big parliamentary and political moment in terms of Parliament and MPs for Boris Johnson. It's also critically important for him in terms of the country. Let's just show you some of the other papers from around the country. The Yorkshire Post. The Prime Minister deceived families who were grieving. This is in the Aberdeen Press and Journal. Grieving daughters' fury at report of yet another number 10 party. And the Shropshire Star. They partied, we suffered. Do you understand that anger?
I fully understand that anger. I mean, we've all had... I was sort of meeting my elderly father in the street at a distance at the time. We missed funerals. We missed all of those events. And I think everybody in the country will have a story to tell of what they gave up. Now, what annoys me, I think, more than anything, is that these rules and the regulations, backed up by criminal law, were originating in Whitehall. Did they not believe that these rules were really needed and they're all a bit over the top because they didn't feel that they needed to do it themselves? Now that, on a plate, were the rules silly? I felt that some of them were. I thought many of them were illogical. I'm a member of the COVID recovery group and I voted pretty much against all of these rules because of the loss of logic on many of them. But these were coming out of the heart of Whitehall, who had more data than I had to go on. And they didn't
I think that's the crucial point, right?
Did they think these rules
they had more data.
Let Polly respond.
Or did they think these rules were sensible?
I think they thought that they had more data and they knew that they were safe. You'll remember there was a sage advisor relatively early on who had to step down because he had met up with his girlfriend. And he, when he spoke about that, said because he knew that they'd had COVID and so it wasn't actually a public health risk. I think they knew that so many of them had it. They knew they were working closely together. I don't think the garden is a really fair point because we didn't know at the time how safe outdoor is. But that's what they thought, is they knew more than us, they were cleverer than us. Instead of understanding that leadership is not about every single individual situation and whether that's safe. When it comes to public health, just as you've said, all of the rules are blunt. Most of the interactions that most people gave up would have been safe. But the only way to get rid of the dangerous interactions is to get rid of all of them. And they didn't understand leadership. For me, the iconic picture of this is our Queen sitting alone at her husband's funeral. Yeah. And that is leadership. And for me, whether you like the Prime Minister, whether you agree with his political agenda, and very often I don't, it's about something different about what we can expect from a Prime Minister, to understand that you have a unique role when you hold that office, when you live behind that door, and it is to lead the country and to lead by example. And what breaks my heart is that simple fact is nothing to do with policy, but it's a fact.
And has he failed on those terms, Boris Johnson, in your mind?
I don't know what the facts are.
No, but apart from that, just listening to what Polly has said, when it comes to leadership, are you disappointed by Boris Johnson? Has he let you down?
Polly said something very charitable, which I think was reasonable. I mean, I don't particularly take that view, that people who were working in a big work bubble. So I'm sure many people who are working there thought, well, this is no different from my work bubble, there is no greater risks, and all of that. But number 10, uniquely, has to show good optics to the nation. And on that basis, it seems to have failed. I cannot imagine how that HR department under Martin Reynolds, effectively, could have thought this is a good look.
But what about Boris Johnson? He is the Prime Minister. Are you disappointed in him and his behaviour and the lack of leadership as described by Polly?
It's a very big office, and I don't know yet, until Sue Gray reports, how much he knew. Was he in control of every single office in that building? That is what the purpose of the Sue Gray report... Well,
I've worked in number 10,
sure.
and absolutely.
But that's where the facts we need. And then I will come out with a statement that's either very positive or negative.
The Prime Minister of this country cannot control, a few thousand square feet around him. Through leadership, through example, then, he doesn't deserve to be the Prime Minister. What you permit, you promote in any kind of leadership culture.
Are your constituents let down?
I've had a number of emails. I'm sure every single MP in this land has had a number of emails raising exactly the type of concerns that we've been discussing. And I appreciate those, and I will be responding to them today. I mean, my point at the moment is we're in a semi-judicial process. I want to see the outcome of that, and then I will
whether that's sustainable,
fulsomely.
Or not, I don't know. That line is being stretched
Maybe
incredibly
today,
thin.
I'm sure lots will come out.
Absolutely, and we will find out, of course, in just under half an hour's time. But just briefly, what about your colleagues? Have you spoken to them? You've had letters from constituents. What about your colleagues? How are they feeling? We know many of them are furious.
Oh, they are. I mean, many have gone public today, and they're all over the press. I discuss many matters, of course, in the members' tea room and on the, here, there, and everywhere. I always keep those very secret. That is what I do.
Barry, can I just show you, or draw your attention to this headline that I'm going to show everybody, the Daily Express. Winning war on COVID, fixed Brexit, don't blow it now, Prime Minister. Is there any case or argument that says that there should be some context to what is commonly being called Partygate and a variety of allegations around gatherings when you look at what else is going on in the country?
I think that's what I was saying at the beginning, actually. I do think that if it were simply any normal person visiting a party, it would not go to the integrity of the government. It would be an offence. It would be an offence that the police might investigate and that they might find somebody for, and that would be the end of it. But this is not. This is about the integrity of the Prime Minister, who has repeatedly, I believe, lied both to Parliament and the public over all these party issues. And people then look at that and they say, well, they connect that with the support that he gave for Owen Paterson and the disaster that led to for their party over the Randox 600 million being...
Yep.
And they begin to put this all together and they say, this is a human being who, in the words of a former cabinet colleague, we understand, said that he simply lies from day to day to get himself out of trouble. Now, that then begins to undermine the whole integrity of government, and that's why this is important.
We're going to return to this later on in the programme, but I want to talk about something else, which are green levies, which we mentioned there in the headlines. Let's just show you the Sun headline, Fix the Bills. Northern Tories tell Boris Johnson how to ease cost of living crisis with three-point plan. Now, number 3 in that three-point plan is scrapping green levies on energy bills for a year. Let's just show you how your fuel bill is broken down. You can see the total annual cost. That's on the basis of the energy price cap of £1,277. 12% is actually going on government social and environment schemes, which you can see is £159, and £61 is VAT. Craig, you want that VAT and green, let's concentrate first of all on the green levies, to be scrapped. Why?
Because it is a significant proportion of what is going to be an eye-wateringly high increase to people's bills. If that could be raised temporarily or suspended temporarily, as your chart showed, with the VAT off as well, we can take £220 off people's bills. Now, that is going to be a significant figure for many people. Now, we had a debate in Parliament yesterday, led by Labour, one of their Opposition Day debates. It was a very good debate. Up to the first line, I agreed with it on reducing VAT, but reducing, I think it was about £61, is not going to go very far. I do think VAT should be removed, because not only is it a Brexit dividend...
Although you didn't actually vote for Labour's
Well, no,
plan.
because it had another 3 pages of how they wanted to take over the order paper on the 1st of February. That was a bit I couldn't agree.
But on the green
we need
levies,
something here and now.
All right, but if you want to see those green levies scrapped, Craig, what's the alternative to funding renewables?
We are going to be talking about exactly the same thing next year, the year after. Just as the Centrica boss has said, these high bills are almost entrenched because we've had an energy policy failure, and that's not just my government over the last 11 years, that was Barry's government as well. It was on the back of Barry's previous government that we've got these eye-watering levies to sustain many of these renewables that simply don't work. We need a different policy. We need new nuclear. We're 10 years out of date. We're getting that renewed. And we have to look at gas. What is the point in spending billions with Putin's Russia for him to have more money to have weapons of offence on our borders? It's geopolitical.
Barry, how do we protect the poorest in society without neglecting our commitment to the green transition?
Well, look, it's not an either-or. And were Craig talking against the eco scheme, that's the energy company obligation that is this
Do you not
green...
agree that gas is better than living?
Hang on, Craig, let Barry respond.
Were Craig saying this 5 years ago, I might have agreed with him, because at that stage the eco scheme was not targeted specifically 100% of it at the poor, the marginal and the most vulnerable, the fuel poor. So if you want actually to relieve the burden on the fuel poor, it's the eco scheme that now, since 2018, is devoted 100% to doing that, to lowering their energy costs. So it's not a good way to achieve the objective that Craig says he wants. It's interesting that, you know, you've got Centrica, the people who make their money from selling gas, saying they want to get rid of it. You know, there's no obligation on Centrica to pass that 640 million a year onto the consumer. They can pay that. They've got profits. I think their profit in 2019 was about 1.4 billion. They could actually simply do it. It's their obligation. And also the contracts are there. So, but they want to sell more gas to us. Let's be clear about that. And actually, I've got 3 little words that would solve the problem. And that's rising block tariff. At the moment, the people who use least gas pay more per unit for gas than the people who use the most. If you change that on its head, the people who are heating their swimming pools and having their indoor cinemas would be paying a much more cost, and it would be a higher rate per unit of electricity.
Well, hang on, but Craig,
I don't know anyone who's got swimming pools.
But hang on, Craig. Barry is absolutely. But hang on, Barry is right. Yeah, but hang on, Barry is right that the money, those green levies you talk about wanting to be scrapped, help support the warm homes discount and that energy
100%.
Company obligation. It's a £1 billion scheme. It pays for insulation and new boilers. So what you're proposing is short-sighted.
Well, it's short-sighted in that I want to take those obligations off the lowest paid and have them back onto general taxation for a while until we get some sense back into the energy market. I don't know. I've got some solutions, Barry, to take £220 off people's bills in the 1st of April. You don't.
No, I do. Sorry, that's absolutely wrong. And you expand the Warm Home Scheme. You put a windfall levy on the oil and gas companies. Shell made £70 billion profit last year. Exxon £50 billion. You put a windfall on them to expand the Warm Home Scheme. You do exactly what I've said on the rising block tariff.
Usually tax things you want less of. I think at the moment we need more cheap energy.
Let me bring in.
And that's what
Polly.
renewable energy is.
It's
the cheapest form of energy.
Really? Well,
and if you see the way it's come down...
All right.
As you well know.
I mean, Polly, are environmental levies on our energy bills defensible at a time when household budgets are squeezed and the British gas owner Centrica warns high energy bills to last for 2 years?
I don't think they are, actually. I think the renewable subsidies need to be funded through general taxation because it is more progressive to do so. It is a choice to put them through energy bills, which are much more regressive in terms of the poorer you are, the higher a proportion of your income you pay as energy costs, and therefore it has a sharper impact on you. I think lots of people who really care about climate change and about net zero, who believe that this is the generational challenge we face, will be frightened, though, about that idea of messing with the green tariffs and uncomfortable with some of the rhetoric which gets easily caught up in a kind of anti-climate change, anti-climate change, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Sort of eco-skepticism. And I understand why lots of green activists will be really uncomfortable sort of allying themselves with those who want to bring energy prices down, because they think that prices should be high to incentivise us to change our behaviour. In the long term, you have to remember the UK doesn't have high energy prices, it has high energy bills, and that's because our homes are rubbish, and you have to insulate them. That's an essential.
But that is a major project, isn't it, that's going to take a long time?
That's a long time. We've got a problem on the 1st of April.
But you have to do something swiftly. Energy prices are already high. They're already providing that incentive to people to change their behaviour, and you cannot put this pain on poor and vulnerable people.
Salma, should green levies go from bills to general taxation?
I do think there's an argument to make the tax a bit more progressive, but just to Polly's point, actually the reason that you're putting it on bills is to make people that much more conscious of their own consumption. I think I agree with the idea that actually that I think has been mooted by Treasury sort of informally, that there will be some kind of relief programme for those people who are on the lowest incomes to help with energy costs. But I think if you have a government that has really pushed around the green agenda, as we did over COP, you know, how quickly we forget that sort of intervention, then I think it is important to stick with, the green agenda, which obviously needs to be funded. I think the other sort of difficulty we're going to face is that if you start sort of very randomly sort of removing VAT from certain bills, you're going to leave the Treasury with a big black hole that's not going to be able to balance the scorecard. So, you know, if we're in a situation where if you take away from this, if you take away from this, it's that where else are we going to actually start feeling the pinch?
Right.
So there are no good choices here.
Right, but Craig, you were agreeing there, but you do want to see VAT taken off.
Well, we have a tax pie and we've got to decide how we're going to spend it. I'm sure they're working hard in the Treasury at the moment, coming up with various proposals. And they may be very similar to Barry's ones, they may be more similar to mine. There will be a scheme of support, I can be absolutely sure of that will be ameliorating some of these high bills.
And does that reassure you then, Barry?
No, I'm not reassured. I think what needs to happen is that the government must press on with ensuring that the most vulnerable benefit, and that's what the Eco Scheme does. It's specifically targeted for energy efficiency for the poorest people in our community. That's why Eco is important. It doesn't need to be funded in the way it is on bill payers. It could be paid for by the energy companies or indeed out of general taxation. But my way of doing that would be to say there's a windfall tax on a very, very profitable industry, which our Chancellor gave 130% super tax deductibles to in oil and gas offshore exploration. Now, that money means that we, the taxpayer, are paying the price...
Would you at least,
sorry,
Barry,
hang on, let me
agree
finish.
with one thing?
Are paying the price for all of the investment that goes into an oil field like the Campbell oil field, which is then polluting our country and our
Can we agree on
planet
one
even
thing?
further.
We are going to be on a diminishing use of gas over time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Would it not be more sensible to be sourcing that domestically rather than sourcing it abroad?
I'm going to have to cut in here because we have to move on. It's going to be coming up to 15 minutes until PMQs. I'd like to welcome viewers on the BBC News Channel who are joining us here on Politics Live ahead of PMQs in about 15 minutes' time, when we'll hear Boris Johnson respond for the first time to allegations that he attended a rule-breaking party at Number 10 during lockdown. I'm joined in the studio by Conservative MP Craig McKinley, Labour MP Barry Gardiner, former Government Special Advisor Salma Shah and the Chief Executive of the Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie. Craig, first of all, if it is the case that Boris Johnson has misled Parliament on whether or not he was at that party, a rule-breaking party, on the 20th of May 2020, will he have to resign? I'm
not going into ifs. I'm waiting for the Sue Gray report, a very, very tough woman.
I'm not asking you to give your verdict, but if he is found to have misled Parliament, will he have to go?
I will have to hear, if he is found guilty of attending this party, I will have to hear what he's got to say about that, whether the apology is fulsome enough, what the circumstances are. I want to hear the evidence, and I want to hear Sue Gray's report, which I will pore over, as I'm sure we all will, very, very carefully. It might not be too far away.
Do you think that line about waiting for the result of the inquiry into what went on in terms of all of the parties and gatherings that we have evidence for is going to hold? Or do you want to hear the Prime Minister today, in 15 minutes' time, in the House of Commons, say whether he attended that party or not and apologise?
I think when he's been given a very bald question, were you there? I don't think it's unreasonable now for him to give us a very clear answer. I think that is what he should be doing at PMQ. We'll wait to hear what he's got to say, but he may surprise us.
Right. And if he does say that he was at that party, should he apologise there and then or resign?
I don't think we're into the realms of resignation yet. I don't know how that would interact with the ministerial code. Again, that is for Sue Gray to come up with the evidence. As I say, I've been a magistrate for 10 years, or I was. I look at the evidence. I give people the benefit of the doubt until the case is proven. And I think a few days' delay on that is not at all unhelpful at this time.
Salma, let me just get a sense from you about what advice you would be giving to the Prime Minister, what you think has been going on this morning. You used to work for a Cabinet Minister, and this morning we haven't heard from anyone, unusually, in government on the day of Prime Minister's questions. What do you think is going on and what should they be doing?
Well, I think the reason that you probably haven't heard from other cabinet ministers is that they're all going into slight self-protection mode, in that they don't want to be seen to be defending something that is, quite frankly, indefensible. I think what's probably happening in Number 10 is a calculation on what Keir Starmer is potentially going to be asking at PMQs and how those questions are going to be worded and what is the best defence against it. I think there was some sort of talk that the Prime Minister might offer his own statement. That doesn't seem to be happening now. But I think in the way that some of these responses are going to be drafted, I think there's got to be, and my advice would be, to offer a fulsome apology, to show total contrition, and to hope that people will give you the benefit of the doubt enough if you acknowledge that you've made those mistakes and that you regret them.
Right, just before we continue, I think we can dip into the chamber, into the House of Commons. Obviously, we have 10 minutes or so. You can see that the chamber is filling up, unsurprising on a big day like today. I said that we haven't heard from any ministers, and we haven't this morning. We are actually hoping to hear from someone after Prime Minister's questions, lucky old them. But we know that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, won't be beside the Prime Minister today, and that's because he is in Ilfracombe on business. Is that a coincidence, do you think, Craig?
I don't think the Chancellor is always next to the PM when there are other things. And let's not forget, there are other things in this country we need to be talking about. It's levelling up, it's energy costs, it's the potential constitutional crisis in Northern Ireland, it's the gathering of troops, Russian troops on the Ukraine border. Let's not forget there is a big world out there. I know this is manna from heaven with a lot of gold topping on, and we're enjoying it, aren't we? But let's not forget there is the issue of government to continue.
Craig,
are
sorry,
you enjoying it, Barry?
I'm really sorry. If you're enjoying this,
I'm
not,
enjoying
and
it,
the
I can tell you
country
that.
certainly is not. The country is not enjoying this because they feel that they've been lied to. They feel they've been treated.
I understand that.
They feel that they have
Absolutely.
been treated with contempt because it's been one rule for Boris Johnson and those around him.
You know there is a quasi-judicial
I'm sorry, I
process
let you
in
speak.
play.
Let Barry finish.
Please, at least
It's all
let
right, Barry, go on.
me say this. You know, the country feel furious about this. And it is about the integrity of the government. It's about the integrity of the Prime Minister and the integrity of the government. And all the sleaze allegations and all the VIP routes to PPE and all of that are being bundled in together. And people are looking at this government and they're saying, you know what? There's something really, really wrong here, and we can't get an honest word out of this Prime Minister. And that's why he should come to the House of Commons today. He should own up. He should then apologise fulsomely. In my view, he should then resign, because that is the sanction of breaking the ministerial code and lying to Parliament. And he has repeatedly, in my view, done that. He has lied to Parliament about these parties.
How
In
big a
your view, let's wait for Sue Gray for please.
How
please.
big a challenge for Keir Starmer as the leader of the opposition on a big day like this?
I think Keir will handle this with his usual forensic skill. He will know that he has to make the question clear, and he will know that he has to make sure that the Prime Minister answers it. I trust him to do that.
Right. Do you think he will be able to make him answer it?
Yes?
What question has he got to put, then, to Boris Johnson?
I have no inside information, Jo, on that.
What advice would you give, first of all, to the Prime Minister standing up today? Can he turn this around?
You know, Boris Johnson has is it greased ferret sort of ability to escape from crises of all kinds. And I think there is the possibility that some sincerity and apology, with some humility and yet some warmth, that maybe he could pull that off. And I think, you know, Craig and Barry were essentially actually arguing the same point, which is that there is a bigger world out there. There are important things. There is a huge agenda for this government from, you know, and we could list it, but if you haven't got trust between citizens in a democracy and between citizens and their government, you can't address any of those things. I've just published a book, I'm sure you've read it, Jo, called Making Democracy Work, and it makes that case that if you haven't got trust, you've got nothing. And we cannot have a useless government right now because there is too much to be done. And I think if the question for Boris Johnson is whether he can pivot to becoming a Prime Minister who's actually capable of getting things done, not just distracting everybody into this endless, tedious warfare about who said what.
Do you accept, Craig, that the government can't get on with the big issues that you outlined just a few moments ago until this is sorted out?
No, I do agree that the relationship between the populace and us, MPs, I mean, Barry and I, we receive it on a daily basis. You have to have trust. And yes, I can see that trust has been worn a little thin at the moment. But as I say, I'm waiting for more information, and I'll be as vocal as Barry and others once I receive that.
Right, well, we look forward to that. Salma, I'm just going to show everybody this tweet from Christian Wakeford, Conservative MP. How do you defend the indefensible? You can't. It's embarrassing. And what's worse is it further erodes trust in politics, which we've just heard from the panel, when it is already low. We need openness, trust and honesty in our politics now more than ever, and that starts from the top. He is not the only Conservative who has said this kind of thing. We heard from Douglas Ross yesterday, the leader of the Tories in Scotland, saying that if it is found and established that Boris Johnson has misled Parliament, then he will have to go, and he wasn't alone. Is the Prime Minister losing support across the party?
I think that's undeniable. I think the longer term question is whether he can stem that and turn that around. But at this point in time, it's not just about the constituents and the really tragic stories that we're hearing about what people had to go through, especially with losing family members at that time in lockdown. It is really about how these MPs feel themselves and how they feel personally angry about having to go out and defend these ridiculous parties and these ridiculous policies when actually there are bigger things to be dealing with. And just to sort of agree with Polly's point, actually the trust issue and the erosion of trust means that when it does come round to other big decisions that aren't just about sort of, people's poor personal choices, that are about larger policy choices, it's whether you are then going to trust the Prime Minister to do the right thing and have the right balance of judgment when those questions come up. So I think there are a lot of people who are just personally furious about this. It's not just about sort of the interests either structurally or from constituents, but on a personal moral basis, they are angry.
Right, and as we said, this is an important moment for Boris Johnson in terms of the country, as you've been discussing, but it is a big parliamentary moment. Let's return inside the Palace of Westminster and talk to our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young. She's there in Central Lobby, only metres away from the Commons chamber, where the Prime Minister is going to be facing Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, in just under 5 minutes' time. Just explain for us, Vicky, why this is such a massive moment for Boris Johnson.
Well, I think one of his big problems is that lots of his MPs, as you were saying there, don't feel like coming out to support him. Now, I know that cabinet ministers have been chivied along today to come along, to sit next to him, to show that support. But the problem is what they want to hear from him, what lots of his MPs want to hear from him, is at least some clarification. They feel that it is no longer possible for him to stand here facing at least 6 questions on this issue and just say, look, I've launched an investigation and that's going to report in due course. Because, of course, the response to that is, well, why on earth do you need an investigation to tell you whether you were at this drinks party in your own garden? So I think they want maybe an apology, but of course he's trying to weigh that up alongside the problem of admitting that he's done anything wrong. He doesn't think he's done anything wrong. Now, what is also interesting is that we haven't really had, certainly in public, any kind of defence from Downing Street about all of this. Now, I think what some ministers feel is that it will go along the lines of, well, look, it's an office, it's not a normal building, it's an office, it's somewhere where people live. Yes, the garden is an extension of that office, and we've heard that defence before, that, look, we went outside to have a meeting, and yes, we had some wine. But I think the Prime Minister is going to have to acknowledge at least the perception that that looks very wrong. Now, whether he'll do that or not is another matter, but I cannot see how he can get through the next half hour without acknowledging something.
Right. I mean, Craig McKinley, who's here in the studio, has been saying continually, amongst other things, that he wants to wait to hear the result of the investigation into a whole string of allegations about parties and gatherings that broke lockdown rules. Is that really sustainable? As you said, Vicky, it will be difficult for the Prime Minister to continue, as many people feel, to hide behind that inquiry as a defence.
Yeah, and I think actually, quite often, and other governments have done it too, haven't they? They've announced inquiries because then every time they get asked about it, they can say, well, look, this is all being looked at. The problem here is that new things have come to light. And what was different about this party on the 20th of May during the first lockdown was that, according to witnesses who've spoken to the BBC, the Prime Minister and his wife went to it. So that's why this is different. There's also, of course, the complication for the Prime Minister that the Met Police say they're in contact with the Cabinet Office about it. It does take it to a different level, and it means that Boris Johnson personally is being dragged further into this scandal. So for him, it's a more dangerous moment. And I think the other problem that he will be worried about is that it's not just his usual critics. And let's be honest here, there are many in his own party who very much dislike him. They're very rude about him. They do want him to go. It's those other ones, some of whom backed him to be their leader, who are now getting a little bit worried about what all this means, about his grip on Downing Street, not just about parties, but what this means for other policy areas as well, and the way that Downing Street is run.
Now, the pressure is clear on Boris Johnson today. It's also on Keir Starmer as the leader of the opposition, who is going to be asking the all-critical questions of Boris Johnson today. Now, it's not always as easy as it looks, is it, to actually get the ball in the back of the net?
Yeah, that's true, and everyone will be expecting him to land some punches here. Now, of course, he's just come out of isolation, having tested positive for COVID for the second time, so I'm sure he's been thinking about this a lot while he's been locked in that room, but he'll be glad that he's out. And of course, people will say, look, he's a lawyer, that analytical approach, he will have to try and pin the Prime Minister down on all of this. Of course, the issue here is that if Boris Johnson gets up at the beginning and says something that we're not expecting, then he has to be fast on his feet, Keir Starmer, and maybe adapt his questions. But it is an opportunity for him. They know that the anger amongst many people, not just in the Conservative Party, but the public as well, means that he has got an opportunity here to try and expose flaws, some people would say, and Tory MPs say this, character flaws of the Prime Minister.
Vicky Young, it's time for Prime Minister's questions.
To Jack Dromey. His working life was devoted to his trade union members and, in recent years, his constituents in Birmingham, Erdington. I was deeply saddened to hear of his death, and my thoughts are with Harriet and the family and all those who knew him as a friend. Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want or to do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules. And though I cannot anticipate the conclusions of the current inquiry, I have learned enough to know that there were things we simply did not get right. And I must take responsibility. Number 10 is a big department with the garden as an extension of the office, which has been in constant use because of the role of fresh air in stopping the virus. And when I went into that garden just after 6 on the 20th of May 2020, to thank groups of staff before going back into my office 25 minutes later to continue working, I believed implicitly that this was a work event. But, Mr. Speaker, with hindsight, I should have sent everyone back inside. I should have found some other way to thank them. And I should have recognised that even if it could be said technically to fall within the guidance, there would be millions and millions of people who simply would not see it that way, people who suffered terribly, people who were forbidden from meeting loved ones at all, inside or outside. And to them and to this House, I offer my heartfelt apologies. And all I ask is that Sue Gray be allowed to complete her inquiry into that day and several others so that the full facts can be established. And I will, of course, come back to this House and make a statement. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. James David. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Carol Ridgway faces 8 weeks of stress and worry as she waits for an urgent appointment at the local breast clinic in North Wales. Yet, despite the pandemic, 85% of patients in England wait only 2 weeks for their urgent suspected cancer referrals. What can my right honourable friend do to ensure equality of healthcare across Britain?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I'm sorry about the case that he raises. Of course, health is a devolved matter, but I thank our NHS colleagues across the whole of the UK, and I point out that the Welsh Government will benefit from an additional £3.8 billion of funding this year, plus a further £270 million to support the response to COVID, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the comments about Jack Dromey. We will, I think, be doing tributes in due course in relation to Jack. Well, there we have it. After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party. It is so ridiculous that it's actually offensive to the British public. He's finally been forced to admit what everyone knew, that when the whole country was locked down, he was hosting boozy parties in Downing Street. Yes. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is...
Hancock went.
I think somebody will be going for an early cup of tea as well. Can I just say, the question's been asked. I want to know the answer. Your constituents want to know the answer. I don't need any extra help either. So please, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the point that he's making about the event that I attended. I want to repeat that I thought it was a work event, and Mr. Speaker, I regret very much that we did not do things differently that evening, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, and I take responsibility and I apologise, Mr. Speaker. But as for his political point, I don't think that he should preempt the outcome of the inquiry, and he will have a further opportunity, Mr. Speaker, I hope, to question me as soon as possible.
Kuenssberg.
Well, that apology was pretty worthless, wasn't it? Let me tell him why this matters. Yesterday, in this chamber, honourable members told heart-wrenching stories about the sacrifices people across the country were making. This House and the whole country were moved by the honourable member for Strangford as he talked about his mother-in-law dying alone. He was following the rules, whilst the Prime Minister was partying in Downing Street. Is the Prime Minister really so contemptuous of the British public that he thinks he can just ride this out?
Mr. Speaker, I heard the testimony of the honourable member opposite, and I echo his sentiments. It was deeply moving. Nobody who heard that could fail to have been moved. And I know that people up and down the country made huge sacrifices throughout this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the anger, the rage that they feel at the thought that that people in Downing Street were not following those rules. I regret the way the event I have described was handled. I bitterly regret it and wish that we could have done things differently. And I have and will continue to apologise for what we did. But, Mr. Speaker, he must wait for the inquiry, which will report as soon as possible.
Kuenssberg.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister's former Health Secretary broke the rules, he resigned. Yes. And the Prime Minister said he was right to do so. When the Prime Minister's spokesperson laughed about the rules being broken, she resigned. And the Prime Minister accepted that resignation. Why does the Prime Minister still think that the rules don't apply to him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what I've said, and I understand the point that he makes. As I've said, Mr. Speaker, I regret the way things happened on the evening in question, and I apologise. But if I may say to him, I do think it would be better if he waited until the full conclusion of the inquiry, until the full facts are brought before this House, Mr. Speaker, and he will then have an opportunity to put his points again.
Kuenssberg.
This just isn't working, Prime Minister. No. Everyone could see what happened. Exactly. It started with reports of boozy parties in Downing Street during lockdown. The Prime Minister pretended that he had been assured there were no parties. Yeah. How that fits with his defence out, I do not know. Exactly. Then the video landed, blowing the Prime Minister's first defence out of the water. So then he pretended he was sickened and furious about the parties. Now it turns out he was at the parties all along. Can't the Prime Minister see why the British public think he's lying through his teeth?
Prime Minister, it was what the public think, not what a member is saying against. Order. And I certainly don't need any help from round here. If somebody wants to help me, they can help somewhere else. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's up to the right honourable gentleman to choose how he conducts himself in this place. He's wrong. He's wrong. I say to him that he is wrong. He is wrong in what he said. He said what he is wrong what he said is wrong in several key respects. But, Mr. Speaker, that does not detract from the basic point that I want to make today, which is that I accept that we should have done things differently on that evening. As I've said to the House, I believe that the events in question were within the guidance and were within the rules, and that was certainly the assumption on which I operated. But can I say to him, Mr. Speaker, that he should wait. He should wait before he jumps to conclusions, Mr. Speaker. A lawyer should respect the inquiry. I hope that he will wait until the facts are established and brought to this House.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, so we've got the Prime Minister attending Downing Street parties, a clear breach of the rules. We've got the Prime Minister putting forward a series of ridiculous denials which he knows are untrue. A clear breach of the ministerial code. That code says ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. The party's over, Prime Minister. The only question is, will the British public kick him out, will his party kick him out, or will he do the decent thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I just want to repeat that I think that the right honourable gentleman, I know that it is his objective and he's paid to try to remove me from office, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that and I accept that. But may I humbly suggest to him that he should wait until the inquiry has concluded. He should study it for himself. And I will certainly respond as appropriate, and I hope that he does. But in the meantime, yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly wish that things had happened differently on the evening of May the 20th, Mr. Speaker, and I apologise for all the misjudgments that have been made, for which I take, Mr. Speaker, full responsibility.
Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister's a man without shame. The public want answers to their questions. Hannah Brady's father, Sean, was just 55 when he lost his life to COVID. He was a fit and healthy key worker. I spoke to Hannah last night, Prime Minister. Her father died just days before the drinks trolley was being wheeled through Downing Street. And last year, Hannah met the Prime Minister in the Downing Street garden. She looked at the Prime Minister in the eye and told him of her loss. The Prime Minister told Hannah he'd done everything he could to protect her dad. Looking back, what Hannah told me last night was this. She realises that the Prime Minister had parted in that same garden the very day her dad's death certificate was signed. What Hannah wants to know is this. Does the Prime Minister understand why it makes her feel sick to think about the way that he's behaved?
Mr. Speaker, I sympathise deeply with Hannah, with people who have suffered up and down this country during the pandemic, and I repeat that I wish things had been done differently on that evening, Mr. Speaker, and I repeat my apology for all the misjudgments that may have been made, that were made on my watch in Number 10 and across government. But I want to reassure the people of this country, including Hannah and her family, that, Mr. Speaker, we have been working to do everything we can to protect her and her family. And it is thanks to the efforts of this government that we have the most tested population in Europe, with 1.25 million tests being conducted every day. We've been working to ensure that this population, our country, has the most antivirals of any country in Europe. And, Mr. Speaker, it's because of the efforts of the government, of officials, of staff up and down Whitehall that we've driven the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, one of the fastest in the world. And that is the reason, Mr. Speaker, that we now have one of the most open economies, if not the most open economy in Europe, and one of the fastest growing economy, Mr. Speaker, in the G7. And, Mr. Speaker, whatever the mistakes that have been made on my watch, for which I apologise and which I fully acknowledge, that is the work, Mr. Speaker, that has been going on in number 10 Downing Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Education is one of the biggest factors when it comes to levelling up. It's what ensures that people right across the country have access to the same opportunities, and it's a key part of my mission to transform lives in Burnley and Padiham. Yeah. With that in mind, would the Prime Minister work with me to ensure that Burnley becomes the best place to study, whether you're in primary and secondary school, looking for an apprenticeship in advanced engineering, or undertaking a degree in cybersecurity?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend, and we're investing in education up and down the country, and I'm delighted that Burnley College was part of a successful proposal to become an institute of technology, and that Burnley is home to the growing University of Central Lancashire campus, making it a fantastic place to study in Lancashire.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I add my remarks in terms of Jack Dromey, someone who was a festy fighter for workers' rights and an inspiration to so many of us across this House for the way that he conducted himself. We will miss him, and condolences to Harriet and to the rest of the family. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stands before us accused of betraying the nation's trust, of treating the public with contempt, of breaking the laws set by his own government. A former member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, Paul, wrote to me this morning. His father died without the love and support of his full family around him because they followed the regulations, Prime Minister. Paul said, as an ex-soldier, I know how to follow the rules, but the Prime Minister has never followed any rules. He does what he wants, and he gets away with it every time. The Prime Minister can't get away with it again. Will the Prime Minister finally do the decent thing and resign, or will his Tory MPs be forced to show him the door?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman, but I want to offer my condolences to his constituent who wrote to him, and just to remind him of what I've said earlier. And with the greatest respect to him, I think that he should wait until the inquiry has concluded.
Ian Blackford.
It's an open and shut case. It's an event that should have taken place. It broke the law, Prime Minister. And what's so galling about that response is that the Prime Minister feels no shame for his actions. The public suffered pain and anguish at being kept apart from their families. All the while, the Prime Minister was drinking and laughing behind the walls of his private garden. The public overwhelmingly think that the Prime Minister should resign. Trust has been lost, and the public will not forgive or forget. If the Prime Minister has no sense of shame, then the Tory backbenchers must act to remove him. They know the damage is done. This weak and contentious Prime Minister can no longer limp on. The message from the public is clear. Remove this unfit Prime Minister from office and do it now.
Prime Minister.
Well, I just want to thank the right honourable gentleman for his political advice, which I will take with a pinch of salt since it comes from the Scottish Nationalist Party. But I think that most people looking objectively at what this government has delivered over the last 18 months would agree and I renew my contrition for the mistakes that have been made, but we have delivered the fastest vaccine and the fastest booster rollout in Europe, and the result is that across our whole of our United Kingdom, Mr. Speaker, we have a record number of people back in work.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I met with the Chief Executive of my local hospital trust, the University Hospitals in Morecambe Bay, to talk about how they were managing COVID and the impact it was having on them. The impact is stark. They've got about 12 to 15% of their workforce away isolating, and 140 beds, that's about 20% of the total, blocked because they can't get people back out into social care and the community. So with that in mind, will my right honourable friend consider reducing the self-isolation period, if it's seen to be safe to do so, down to 5 days, and also accepting any MACA requests which come through to help get people back out into the community and into social care?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, well, we're certainly looking at reducing the isolation period, and hope to bring you more, Mr. Speaker, about that as fast as possible. We'll certainly look at all MACA requests, but more fundamentally, what we can do to alleviate the pressures in his hospital is to fix the health and social care divide, which is what this government is also doing after a generation of neglect.
Stephen Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's apology is too little, too late. If the Prime Minister was sincere, he could have apologised at any stage over the past 18 months, rather than waiting until he was found out. My constituents in North Down and people across the UK feel betrayed by the Prime Minister. We've had over 150,000 deaths from COVID over the past couple of years. We have seen standards in public life trashed. So, for once, can the Prime Minister do the honourable thing and resign for the sake of the public health message and for standards in our democracy?
Mr. Speaker, I can only repeat what I've said, and I understand the feelings he has about the effect of this pandemic on this country, and I certainly grieve for everybody who has died and who has suffered. But on his political point, can I propose that he waits for the inquiry to report?
Susan Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited my local job centre, and I'm absolutely pleased to announce that the adult claimant count is down 28%, and the young adult claimant count is down 40%. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking all the hard work of the Stourbridge Job Centre for their dedication to actually achieve these results, and also to contribute to the jobs revival that's happening across the West Midlands? 61,000 new jobs since March 2021.
Prime Minister. Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank her for that. And it's notable that the opposition don't like to dwell on these points, but it is an astonishing fact that we have 420,000 more people in work now than before the pandemic began, and youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker.
Stephen Bonner.
Mr. Speaker, another week, another scandal for this Prime Minister and his utterly shameless government. For 2 years, my constituents made sacrifice after sacrifice, spending time away from our loved ones, missing out on important life events. Some paid the ultimate sacrifice while he partied away. Figures released just last night show that 79% of people in Scotland think the Prime Minister should step down. Does the Prime Minister now realise that it's clear to all that, while he may not understand how to be socially distant from others, there is no doubt that he is morally distant from the rest of us across these nations, and the best thing he can do now is go. Resign, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the SNP, and I repeat the point that I made earlier on. I don't think that he should preempt or anticipate the inquiry.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Colne Valley Regional Park runs through my constituency and the Prime Minister's. Would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the volunteers who tirelessly work to preserve this precious green space? And will he work with me to create better protections for this park moving forward?
Prime Minister.
I certainly will. I join her in thanking the wonderful volunteers, and I will do what I can to assist her in protecting this beautiful green space.
Ruth Kepley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a different topic to that of my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, but a related one. Last week, at Prime Minister's Questions, the Prime Minister was asked about his previous claim about that his previous claims about inflation were unfounded, and in his reply, he told the House he had said no such thing. But within minutes, the inevitable happened, and people were watching videos on social media saying exactly that. So would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to correct the record and apologise for misleading the House on this matter?
That would be inadvertently misleading the House. Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, because I immediately said in my answer to the question that, of course, you had to be concerned about inflation at all times. What I said, I think on TV, was that some of the predictions then about inflation had not proved well-founded. But clearly, inflation is a serious risk. It is going up, and what we need is a strategy to tackle it, and that's what we have.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Grant Bailey, went back to Afghanistan in September. He disappeared in December around Christmas time. We think the Taliban have him. Can my right honourable friend advise me and his family whether he knows anything about this man, who has him, and what is being done to get him home?
Prime Minister. I thank my honourable friend for raising the case with me, and I hope I will organise a meeting for him with the relevant minister as soon as possible to establish what we can do to help Grant.
Girl Turner.
He's not apologised, Mr. Speaker, for breaking the rules and breaking the law. He's sorry because he's been caught. He is bang to rights. So when my constituents were making unimaginable decisions, he was hosting a boozy party in Downing Street. So how does he think he can still maintain the one rule for him and another for the rest of us? He cannot, and he must resign.
Mr. Speaker, I refer to the answer I gave earlier on.
Peter Byrne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This Friday, my private member's bill, BBC licence fee abolition, gets its second reading. It will abolish the BBC licence fee and require the BBC to be funded by subscription. In this day and age, it's ridiculous to have a state broadcaster. It's ridiculous that people are forced to pay a fee just because they have a television. And what is totally wrong, that people who believe the BBC to be institutionally biased have to subsidise them. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister, if he's free on Friday, come along and support the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I have the highest respect for the media judgment of my honourable friend, and though I understand some of his strictures about the BBC, Mr. Speaker, I would also say that it is a great national institution. But I will study what he has to say with interest.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all had Prime Ministers that we disagreed with or we didn't rate, but there's never been one that debased the office in the way that this. He's now forced to lie down in the back of his car to keep away from photographers. We all know the Prime Minister was sacked from 2 previous jobs for lying. So can he explain to the House why he believes that the great office of Prime Minister can be held to a lower standard than those previous jobs that he was sacked from?
Prime Minister.
Well, I welcome the point that the honourable gentleman makes. In the partisan spirit with which I think it was intended, I don't agree with him. But can I suggest to him respectfully that he waits until the inquiry is concluded, which I hope will be as soon as possible.
Alberto Costa.
Washing machine manufacturers are considering installing microfiber filter systems in all new washing machines. Will the Prime Minister ask his ministers? Will the Prime Minister ask his ministers to look at?
We've got a slight problem. Some of you want to catch my eye. The longer this question takes, the less other people will get in. Alberta Costa.
People laughing at plastic pollution, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister ask his ministers to look into the viability of my bill, which has cross-party support and seeks to introduce inexpensive microplastic filters on all new washing machines?
Well, I want to thank my honourable friend for his campaign. And I believe that we should tackle microplastic pollution, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad that DEFRA are looking at the introduction of legislation for microfibre filters on washing machines as a cost-beneficial solution. And I will make sure that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, will keep him informed of how we're doing.
Mr. Brenda Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too wish to join colleagues in paying tribute to Jack Dromey. I knew him first in the early 70s and worked with him on the Grunwick strike. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, thousands of men and women in Afghanistan supported the NATO mission, and they have been abandoned. In 6 months, we don't have a credible route to help people out of Afghanistan safely. The most recent update from the FCDO is directly contradicted by the UN. While the FCDO claims that from spring the UNHCR will make referrals to evacuation schemes, the UNHCR's own website is very clear they make no such reference. Mr. Speaker, is the government creating a Kafkaesque system to intentionally fail those we owe something to, or is this yet another case of the amateurism and hopelessness that prioritized pen farthings pets over human beings?
Mr. Speaker, I believe he does a serious injustice to the efforts of local councils up and down the country to look after people coming from Afghanistan, and I think he does an injustice to the efforts of the UK. We are proud already under Operation Pitting to have evacuated 15,000 people from Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker, and we've allocated $286 million in aid, in assistance for people in Afghanistan, and we are continuing to offer safe passage to this country from Afghanistan.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that Eastleigh was formed as a railway town, from producing locomotives and carriages to building gliders for the D-Day landings. Eastleigh has a proud railway heritage.
Hear, hear.
Given this pedigree, the excellent transport links and the need to level up the south, does he agree with me that Eastleigh would make the perfect home for the new headquarters of Great British Railways?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great champion for Eastleigh, and as I told the House earlier, further details of the competition to identify the new Great British Railways headquarters will be announced in the coming weeks.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Stockport, the average rent for a two-bedroom property is an unaffordable £800. And recently, in the last 13 years, the rents have been significantly increasing. One constituent contacted me recently to explain that she and her husband, who are in their 70s and suffer from ill health, have just been served with a Section 21 notice after living in the property for almost 20 years. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's own manifesto promised a better deal for renters, which included abolishing no-fault evictions. So when will he scrap this practice and reintroduce the much-needed Renters Reform Bill, which seems to have been kicked into the long grass?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the first things I did when I became Prime Minister was to uprate local housing allowance so that people on social rent would be able to afford where they live more easily. Is a key component of tackling the cost of living, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is building record numbers of homes, Mr. Speaker. And I was very pleased to see a huge increase in the number of people able to get the homes that they need. But the point that he makes about renters is also very, very important. And that's why we're tackling the rights of renters as well.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 56 million through the Levelling Up Fund, 40 million through Transforming Cities. This is just some of the investment we've secured for Stoke-on-Trent recently. Would my right honourable friend agree, after decades of neglect, this Conservative Party is the only party that is levelling up opportunities in Stoke-on-Trent?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He is a fantastic champion for Stoke-on-Trent, and in addition to all the things that we are supporting in Stoke-on-Trent, I'm delighted to say that Stoke-on-Trent will become the home to the Home Office as well.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think this session shows how much of a distraction the Prime Minister's behaviour has been. I want to ask him that after a recent survey showed 37% of small businesses felt totally unprepared for the introduction of import controls, rules of origin and the upcoming SPS checks. So will he listen to the FSB and introduce financial and technical support to those small businesses, or is he just too busy drinking in his garden?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank her, but what we are doing is offering financial and technical support to businesses, and they are responding magnificently. And as we come out of the pandemic, we are seeing, as I said to the House earlier on, record numbers of people in work and youth unemployment at a record low.
Alicia Cairns.
Speaker, the motto of England's smallest county, Rutland, is multum in parvo, much in little, and never has that been more true than the last 2 weeks. The greatest Roman discovery in 200 years, an ichthyosaur, the greatest fossil discovery in 100 years. So will he please support us to build a new tourism industry and 2 heritage museums in Rutland to preserve these amazing discoveries in our county?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm agog. I'm longing to come and see these extraordinary additions to the cultural heritage of Rutland, and I thank her for drawing it to my attention, and I look forward to making a visit as soon as I can.
Daniel Zeitner.
Mr. Speaker, the government's flagship Green Homes grant scheme collapsed in a £1.5 billion shambles at the end of last year, with just 81 vouchers issued in Cambridge and just 85 in the Prime Minister's constituency. With energy bills about to go through the roof, what is it about this government that makes it so peculiarly unable to run a basic loft-lagging scheme?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are supporting measures to retrofit homes up and down the country, and in addition, in order to improve the insulation, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is supporting people with the costs of their fuel. We will continue to do that through the Warm Homes discount, the winter fuel allowance, and all the other payments that we make.
We're going to leave Prime Minister's questions at this point. Of course, if there are any important developments, we will bring them to you. Let me just introduce our guests for this part of the programme. We have Rachel McLean, who is the Safeguarding Minister for the Government, Alison McGovern, who is Shadow Employment for Labour, the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, is here. And we're going to start with the extraordinary opening of Prime Minister's questions. Before Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, got to pose his questions, as expected, we heard from Boris Johnson first, answering some of the allegations that have been levelled at him. Let's have a listen.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want, or to do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself, the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules.
Boris Johnson there at the beginning of Prime Minister's questions. Laura, when you take into account everything that we know, the evidence that has been presented in terms of the Prime Minister and his wife attending what has been billed as a COVID-breaking event in the garden at Number 10, is that going to be enough to turn things around?
I don't think this makes it go away at all. I don't think it will. I mean, the Prime Minister tried to strike a very, very different tone. There were no smirks, there was no swagger, there were none of the usual Johnson gags. He did apologise, which many of his colleagues were calling for. He admitted he was there. He admitted that the party took place, which until this moment hadn't actually been something that the government was saying with any kind of clarity, although they hadn't denying it. But Boris Johnson did also say that technically he still thinks it was within the rules. Now, there is the rub. Where did it say in the rules at that time, in May 2020, for any of the public, for millions of people who had to change their behaviour? Where did it say that it was OK for an email to be sent asking people to go to what was billed clearly as a social event? And that is why, you know, the black and white evidence in the email that shows that this was an organised, pre-planned thing. This wasn't a few people having a meeting in the Downing Street garden. We know that that happened. People used the space to do their job. We know that sometimes people had a glass of wine while they were doing it. But the email, really, that we saw at the beginning of this week is what's changed the dynamic here. Now, this may well have bought Boris Johnson some time. He's basically pleading with his party to say, wait till the inquiry before you make your final mind up. But I think some people will see that as being a non-apology apology, because basically saying, well, I'm sorry, I was there, it did happen, but I still think it was OK. And somehow it kind of wasn't really my fault. Well, other people may beg to differ.
Rachel, Laura is absolutely right that Boris Johnson confirmed that the gathering, the drinks event, took place in number 10 at the height of lockdown. And you will know that the rule stated very clearly that at that point you could only meet one other person outdoors. This was an event that had at least 30 people outdoors, including the Prime Minister. I went into the garden at number 10 after 6 p.m. 25 minutes later, I went back inside. He was at this COVID rule-breaking event for 25 minutes. Do you accept that he has broken the rules?
Well, I think what we've heard him say today very clearly is that he recognises that anger and that sense of injustice. And I just want to start by saying that I also feel the same, as anybody would. I mean, I was following the rules. I couldn't see my own children. My own mother was in a nursing home. I couldn't see her. And those stories, of course, have been repeated by my constituents, by people up and down the country, and, of course, other members of Parliament. We've all heard that. We've all been through this. So he's absolutely right to address that front and centre.
Was that gathering legal?
So I can't answer that question. That's why
I've given you the rules, Rachel. The rules said very clearly that you could only meet one other person outdoors. In fact, the Cabinet Minister, Oliver Dowden, stated it in a briefing, I think, on the very same day. And yet we now know, we've had it confirmed by Boris Johnson, that there was a party, in effect. It had booze. People were asked to bring their own. There had been an invitation to 100 or so people in the garden. This was not an extension, as the Prime Minister tried to say, of a work meeting. It was a social event where people could enjoy the lovely weather, or words to that effect in the email. Was it a legal gathering?
So I think what you're asking me here is to prejudge the outcome of the inquiry.
Just as an ordinary person, that was the rule. We know now what was going on in number 10 in the garden to which the Prime Minister attended. Looking at those rules, would you say the rules had been broken?
Well, with respect, we don't know. I don't know what was going on. I wasn't there. I never went into Downing Street. I was in my constituency for that entire period. I don't work in Downing Street. I was not invited to the party. Yeah. This is why we've appointed a senior civil servant to investigate all those details. And you are right to point out that this is a place of work as well. This is why we have the inquiry, and we must wait for that outcome.
But the inquiry is looking at a whole series of events, parties and gatherings. Let's just focus on this one in particular, because the Prime Minister says, with hindsight, I should have sent everyone inside. Now, if with hindsight he is saying he should have sent everyone inside, would that, in your mind, constitute that rules were being broken? It was an illegal party and gathering to which he attended.
I think he's being quite clear in his comments that he recognises that that particular instance was a lapse in judgment. And I think he's been very clear with the House of Commons, actually, today. And he has come and he's addressed that. So, look, again, I will say what I've said before. I don't know exactly what was going on. I wasn't there. I can't possibly know what was going on. Clearly, that was a place of work. There were people working. And actually, let's remember what we were actually doing as a government. We'd just signed the AstraZeneca vaccine contract. We were starting to get vaccines
Minister,
ready
with
for
respect,
people.
what you were doing was telling the rest of the British public that they had to stay inside their house, apart from go to work if they were a key worker or meet with one other person outdoors.
Exactly.
That's why people are so angry, is because the government was telling the public to do one thing and doing something else on its own premises.
People are angry because people in this country have a sense of fair play. And the perception is that there were people in Downing Street doing what they shouldn't have been doing while they were following the rules. And that's exactly the reason why people are angry. And the Prime Minister has been very clear, and he's been very straight with the Chamber today in Parliament, that he recognises that anger.
Right, on the basis of being straight, well, but people might say he recognises the anger because he's been found out. That's the only reason that he recognises the anger. You called it a lapse of judgment. He is the Prime Minister. He was making these rules. He was telling people what they could and they couldn't do. And yet he thought in that moment that it was absolutely fine to go outside into a garden on a lovely summer's evening when everyone else was pretty well locked up in their home, look at the party in front of him and stay for 25 minutes and think that was fine. If that was a lapse of judgment, do you think he should resign for that lapse of judgment? A major error.
No, of course I don't think he should resign. I mean, this is clearly a political and opposition-driven campaign.
No, hang on.
Let's face it.
Hang on. It's not opposition-driven. Obviously, the opposition are obviously wanting him to go. It's on every newspaper. We've had Tory MPs, senior Tory MPs, like the leader of the Tories in Scotland, saying that actually the behaviour, if it is found that he has misled Parliament, Boris Johnson, and we have just heard him say he went into this party. When you look at the rules, it doesn't look as if that could or should have been allowed, then he'll have to resign. It's Conservative MPs who are furious, Rachel, not just opposition.
So I think there are some people who are furious, rightly, and all of us share that anger on all sides of the House and in the general public. But let's face it, if Boris Johnson resigns, the opposition are not going to be happy with any Conservative Prime Minister. So I think, we need to just separate the political issues here from the issue at hand, which is this particular party, this instance. And no, I don't think he should resign. I think we should focus on the delivery, what the government was delivering at that time. We are the most open economy in Europe. We have one of the fastest vaccine rollouts in Europe. Yeah. We are freer and we are better off because we've had Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister.
Just before I come to you, Alison, and I will let you respond, just tell me one thing. You say he's been very candid today, Boris Johnson. Why has it taken him so long to apologise? He's always known that he attended the party. He's known what he's seen. He's been asked to answer whether he attended and repeatedly said we need to wait for the outcome of the inquiry. Why has it taken him so long?
Well, he's been to the House a number of times and addressed these allegations.
No, just since this one.
And he didn't turn up.
He didn't. Why has he waited? What was it he didn't know that he knew today?
Well, you're asking me to comment on what's gone on in the Prime Minister's mind.
No, but what do you think is strange about the fact that he has been asked over the last 3 or 4 days, did he or did he not attend this gathering? And he wouldn't answer. So why wait so long to make the apology?
Well, I think he's answered a number of questions about a number of allegations which have been in the public domain for some time. And he has come to the House today and he has clearly apologised and he's apologised for the right reasons.
He obviously didn't tell Michael Ellis yesterday, who absolutely stonewalled for an hour to members of Parliament, would not answer a question, when clearly he could have been honest with his own junior minister yesterday and he wasn't.
Alison, he did come, the Prime Minister, and apologise. He has given and confirmed some important information. He regrets that things should have been done differently, I think is how he put it. What more do you want him to do?
Resign. I mean, look, I find this absolutely flabbergasting. We have got a Prime Minister who's come to the House of Commons and said, I partied whilst everyone else put their shoulder to the wheel. And he said, but, wait for the details and all the rest of it.
You wanted an inquiry. You called for an inquiry. Should you wait for the details?
Yeah, of course we need an inquiry because we should know what's happened and allegations have been made and they should, they should be looked into. But the central point here is that the Prime Minister was asked direct questions by MPs and journalists and wouldn't answer. We had the absolute farce of yesterday of people not being able to get clear answers. And then today, he comes to the House of Commons and says, I'm awfully sorry, I don't recognise a party when I see one. I mean, that is absolutely bizarre. So I think that people's rage as he put it, is more than understandable. And the question about apologies is always not if you are sorry, it is what do you then do? Because actions speak louder than words. He doesn't need to just say he's sorry, he needs to demonstrate that he is accountable. And I'm sorry if I am getting angry, but I think a lot of people, Jo, out there are really angry.
Yeah, emotions are running high. We've seen it from MPs from other parties as well in the House of Commons. We heard it from the DUP MP Jim Shannon yesterday when he said that he, or his mother-in-law, was left to die alone at the height of lockdown. And obviously, it looks and feels absolutely terrible. But if you are looking at this and calling on the Prime Minister to resign, do you want him to resign now before the outcome of that inquiry?
I think he... You know, does he have a sense of his own dignity? I mean, Matt Hancock went, you know, Dominic Cummings in the end went. Like, what does he expect? That other people are supposed to take responsibility for their own actions and he doesn't have to? Is that really the situation that we're in?
On that basis, Rachel, you will have heard Keir Starmer outlining those examples. Yes, Matt Hancock, the then Health Secretary, did resign when he broke the rules. Former Press Secretary Allegra Stratton did the same when that video came to light of that mock press briefing joking about cheese and wine parties. Why have they had to resign, but the Prime Minister hasn't?
Well, the law of the land applies to everybody.
Yes. Including the Prime Minister?
Including the Prime Minister. The people that make the laws are also subject to the laws. And that's why we've got this due process of this inquiry to find out exactly what went on, and if any laws were broken, there will be consequences.
So, Minister, if this inquiry says that Boris Johnson broke the rules, he should resign then, by that implication of what you've just said.
So I'm not going to repeat what I've just said, but clearly there are consequences, and the Prime Minister has been clear that there will be consequences.
But to be specific on this for our audience, so you've said very clearly if people are found to have broken the rules, there will be consequences for them. To be really clear, you include the Prime Minister in that. You are saying to our viewers today that if the inquiry finds that Boris Johnson himself broke the rules, he should resign.
I'm not going to get into these hypotheticals. This is why we have
hypothetical. I'm asking you to clarify what you've said.
I'm not going to repeat what I said. There are consequences for people that broke the law in this country. We know the police are looking at this situation. There are a number of individuals involved, including senior civil servants. That's why we need to have the inquiry, and then the consequences will follow. That's how we do things in this country.
So you can see sort of events unfolding that if Boris Johnson is found to have broken COVID rules in the way the Health Secretary at the time, Matt Hancock, did, and Allegra Stratton, his former head of press, they resigned, that Boris Johnson could end up resigning.
This is a hypothetical discussion, and I've said what I've said, and I'm just going to leave it there.
Right. I mean, when you look at this inquiry, we don't know when it's going to report. An awful lot is going to hang on the outcome of this investigation for Sue Gray, who is actually carrying it out. But it will, in the end, come down to, were rules broken? Did the Prime Minister attend a law-breaking gathering? And if he did, will he have to resign?
Well, and it will come down to also, I think, the sort of narrative that will be presented by that report. OK, so sometimes Sue Gray is a civil servant with an unimpeachable reputation who, you know, is known to do her job without fear or favour. And yet, in sort of, you know, officialese, in jargon, in technicalities, narratives can sort of emerge about intent. OK, somebody said to me earlier this week they felt actually because Martin Reynolds, who organised the party, was even, ironically, the person in the building who had taken a lot of responsibility for making sure that meetings were COVID compliant. I was told he was somebody who was taking a particular interest in that. They suggested that the Prime Minister would have thought, if Martin has organised this, well, it must be fine, because it was part of his role to sort of make sure that things were following the rules. Now, some of our viewers might hear that and think, well, hang on a minute, did the Prime Minister then not understand his own rules when he went out into the garden and saw these people? Shouldn't he have cottoned on? But, you know, reports can temper things, you know, deliberately or not. And we sometimes, official inquiries and this, that and the other, don't sort of actually point the finger in the way that people's political opponents rather wish they would. I think, actually, in a way, what might be more important is what this does for the mood of the Tory backbenchers, which right now is toxic. It is.
Well, you mentioned Conservative backbenchers. Let's return to the House of Commons, where our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, is waiting. Hello to you, Vicky. Perhaps you can fill us in or give us an idea of the sense of feeling amongst the Tory backbenchers.
Well, I have someone with me who hopefully can help with all of that, because certainly yesterday there was an awful lot of anger amongst Conservative MPs, really worried about this actually and how it is dominating, how it reflects not just on Boris Johnson but on the entire government. Let's speak now to Sir Christopher Chope. You were a bit unhappy yesterday, a bit worried about all of this. What do you make now of this apology from the Prime Minister? Do you think it's sincere? Do you think it was an apology?
Well, it was certainly an apology. I've never heard such an abject apology from a government minister in my 30-plus years in this place. And was it sincere? Yes, I think it was genuinely sincere. And I think that the Prime Minister showed contrition, and he realised that he had done the wrong thing in not intervening at the time and all the rest of it. So I think that when somebody makes an apology like that, then reasonable people accept the apology, obviously with the caveat that this is continuing because there's a continuing inquiry, and he has said that when that inquiry is concluded, then the findings will be published and there will be an opportunity for a further discussion. But in the short term, I think that this is a monumental relief to myself and lots of other colleagues, because we didn't think he'd be able to carry on if he didn't answer the basic question as to whether or not he was there, and he has answered that question now.
But he does suggest he thinks it was within the guidelines. He's not actually saying he's sorry that he did anything wrong. He's actually saying others might have been doing something wrong and he should have sent them back indoors. Was it actually an apology about what he himself had done?
Well, it was an apology. There's no doubt about that. A question you're really saying is, should he have gone on to self-incriminate? And I think that the answer to that lies in no. What he should do is wait and see the outcome of the inquiry. But this is a really serious problem for, I think, our governance in this country, because what it seems to show is that there's a feeling amongst the civil service and ministers that at the top you can behave in a completely different way from the people to whom you should be responsible. And it's that arrogance of the establishment which in a sense was what got Boris to where he is, because he capitalised on that and said, well, it's the arrogance of the establishment.
Now is he part of that? I mean,
yes, exactly. That's what's so disappointing, because he won support from the public on the basis that the Remain establishment, the Islington man and women, and now he's almost sort of got caught up in it. And did he do it deliberately, or was it because he was took his eye off the ball? We'll have to find out on that. But if we're able to see in the next few weeks the Boris of old, then those who are writing his early obituaries will need to think again.
Are you worried about the attacks on his character? And they're not just from Sir Keir Starmer, they are from some of your colleagues who have, openly said he lies to get out of things. That's a problem, isn't it?
Well, obviously, I thought it was interesting that the Leader of the Opposition was not able to press home his suggestion that the Prime Minister had lied to Parliament, which, as you surmised, would be a really serious issue.
Serious issue anyway about his character.
Well, but if you call somebody a lie, you need to have some evidence, and Keir Starmer was effectively calling him a liar, but without producing any evidence.
Okay. Christopher Chope, thank you very much. And it's now all up to really that Sue Gray report and what that finds.
Vicky Young, thank you very much there in Central Lobby. Listening to that, Alison, Christopher Chope, Conservative MP, the Prime Minister showed contrition. He's never heard such an abject apology. That sounds like at least Christopher Chope is satisfied with what he heard from the Prime Minister.
I'm not sure what he meant by abject. I think he might have meant pathetic, rubbish apology. I think that the Prime Minister has really not accepted fundamentally what he did wrong. With hindsight and all of those words, I think, as I said before, the truth of the matter is that apologies count for something when you act to demonstrate you're taking accountability. And the Prime Minister has singularly failed to do that today.
Where does this go now, Laura?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister was trying to do, and may have had some success with, by admitting that he was there, so at least addressing the issue, is to buy himself some time to accept that he had to fess up to a certain extent about things that had gone on. But I think it will make it easier for Conservative MPs like Christopher Chope, who are naturally loyal to Boris Johnson, But yesterday we're thinking, what on earth is going on here? It gives him a bit of a chance, but this inquiry is hanging on and the mood in the Tory party is toxic. It really is.
That's all we have time for. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me today on this important moment at Westminster.